time, so I'll try and dash through this as much as I can. But thanks, Colin, for setting me up. I hope what I'm going to say chimes with my colleagues, but maybe adds a very specific focus which reflects this current project, Objects of the Anthropocene. And this is a speculative design project as part of this year's UCL Slade Scientist in Residence project. And I put on the slide a picture of Billingsgate Roman bathhouse in Lower Thames Street as a way to kind of get a sense of the physicality of heritage places and its objects. So in London, we can touch the preserved remains of the Roman city that span across 2,000 years and speculate on the lives lived in Londinium. It's more difficult to imagine a future London 2,000 years into the future. So this talk is going to reflect on the ontological reality of the past and future that is irreversibly changed in its evolution to the present. The construction of the past is no more real than our projections of the future. They're both concepts that emit from the present and are constrained by our frames of reference in the here and now. The present has always been going on in an eternal return to itself, each moment pointing towards a future through continuous emergence of what is new and the alteration of what already existed. So I hope you can see slide 2 now. So what does the Anthropocene mean for archaeology? I think it's positioning the time frames of archaeology from the human to relate them to geological and cosmological time frames. It's an orientation of the archaeological gaze from the human past to the deep future. And it helps us strengthen ways to propose near futures, possible futures, and implausible but real nows. Humility in the face of human inconspicuousness is juxtaposed with a human hubris of announcing the Anthropocene. And similarly to Colin, I have an issue with how do we descend to the human while still claiming a central role for human agency in the Anthropocene. I'd like to propose some tools for a heritage response that we utilise in the Misanthropocene exhibition. And I'm using Haraway's FS nomenclature here for speculative futures and pasts, the reciprocal speculation of both stories of the past and the future, science fact and science fiction, the authorising of knowledge production systems of truth about the world, and speculative fabulations and fabrications, speculative methods to construct world-making scenarios and the reification of those worlds in their implication in the present. So these processes function within the Objects of the Misanthropocene exhibition to select a range of future worlds from fictional to non-fictional accounts from which to situate a critical assessment of our present choices. Objects from that future world are fabricated and presented as museum objects, as if they have travelled through time from the Museum of Beyond, a future museum situated on the far edge of the Anthropocene. They are interpreted in the exhibition panels and labels from a range of curatorial perspectives that reveal the transtemporal misunderstandings that occur in the translation between different worlds. The development of exhibits is continuing with online Teams meetings involving Slade, IOA, Goldsmiths, Architect Association staff and students. And this exhibition is due to be presented online in August and as a physical exhibition at the Slade and IOA when available. And if anybody wants to be involved in that process, please email me. So these are some of the devices and concepts that we use, and I won't labour these, but it's about temporality, the past, the present, the future, which comes first. Projected time from Dupuy, who identifies that only a possible future is the future that occurs, rendering all other futures impossible. And this adopts a future standpoint that provides an image of the future sufficiently desirable and credible to bring about its own realization, and sufficiently repulsive and credible to prevent its own realization. And this is the mechanism of retroactive causality, in creating a past or a future so real that it casts a shadow over the present and creates the conditions in retrospect from which this past becomes the preferred future reality. Speculative design is a form of future making and world building And these are playful, experimental, and creative research methods that provide what-if questions. And this form of future making helps move beyond the plausible future and shape preferable futures. The ideas freed from speculative world making increase the odds of achieving these preferable futures. And broken worlds, which is a Tim Mullen concept, which again is a certain future world as a stable platform for a critical gaze on the present. In looking at knowledge production systems, the authorizing narratives of heritage, especially within our museums, and the proposed roles for museums recently in the statues must fall debates are the repositories of our bad conscience, where the legacies of the past injustices can be neutralized by objective accounts of an authorized past. This is the Museum of the Mausoleum for the embalmed corpses of previously vital things. And this is reflected in how heritage was understood in the 20th century as the fear of losing the past, in a salvage paradigm that is a response to the absence created in the progress towards a new optimistic future, and the role of conservation here taking place in the wave between the present and the future. Heritage, as understood in the early 21st century, is a vehicle for sustainable development towards the UN's future that we want and sustainable development goals. The heritage paradigm becomes one of ensuring there are sufficient resources to sustain human happiness and well-being in our present and into the future. And Haraway's Great Dithering represents this period as a time of ineffective anxiety about environmental destruction, violent climatic change, and accelerating mass extinctions. And we can imagine how heritage might be understood in the later 21st century as a fear of losing the future, a sense of the past as something to be ashamed of, in salvaging sufficient resources to sustain human populations. So the result of the resultant rupture is now ahead of us rather than in the past. So we can speculate on these future worlds, but can we experience them? Is time travel possible in this role? This is something that's utilized within heritage quite significantly in reenactments, embodied experiences, and mindfulness experiences, where the idea of traveling to other places can be enacted and experienced. So the speculative imagination project, Objects of the Anthropocene, is a larger critical speculative design project developed by goldsmiths as part of an illegal town plan in rural North Wales. And the aim of this project is to build the longest pier in the world in one of the most deprived coastal towns. And the Museum of Beyond is hosted by the university at the end of the longest pier, so that it circumscribes the earth and goes on for eternity, thereby enabling infinite intersections through space and time. Some of the exhibits that we are constructing, and this one is a Anthropocene type specimen, because the Anthropocene is a geological thought experiment that looks back from the post-apocalypse future that collapses the future into the past. And the kind of paradox of the imagining a geologist returning to Earth after the passing of geological epochs as a mineralogist looking at the geological strata using current 21st century geological methods in order to identify rocks that arise through human activities. It seems odd, I think, from our perspective now. And this is a good example of the process of materializing these future worlds as a way of critical stance on our current world, the survival lottery ticket that comes from Mullen's Ethics for a Broken World. People are entered into a survival lottery in order to get the resources they need to survive, but not everybody can. And this forms an opportunity to reflect on our contemporary lotteries of life and our allocation of resources, and how that may be framed in an ethical society of the future where resources are restricted. So just as a final point, The Anthropocene is a speculation, a geological thought experiment that centers a particular type of human, these weird humans, as if everyone was like them, assuming that we're all taking part in the white Anthropocene and the in it together innocent universalism that suggests. So what does the Anthropocene do to archaeology? Well, it creates an emergency, really, of current uncertainties that require us to authorize other operational processes as a matter of urgent concern. And it provides a focus for making good enough, livable spaces that inhabit these more than human worlds by curating nature culture, eco-social, multi-species flourishings. And what can archaeology do to the Anthropocene? Help move beyond concepts that continue to privilege human agency and sustain inequalities towards sustaining our diverse and effective eco-social potentialities of post-human and non-human matter. And we can possibly help address how we descend to the human while still claiming a central role for human agency in the Anthropocene. Thank you.
Dean, brilliant. So we've had a set of really fascinating papers